All right, this is going to be maybe the first of several mountaintop lectures up here in Eagles Rest. Later in the future, we are going to have an outdoor classroom and observation platform, and it'll be handicapped accessible, and it'll be off over that way. And as soon as we can build that and put it in there, the Mountain Stewards will put it in there. We built the trails up here, and we're going to build a moldering toilet pretty soon, and then build that and other facilities as money becomes available. So if you want to contribute toward that, it can go to the Mountain Stewards. It's a nonprofit. It gets tax exempt. And all that money, 100% of it, goes to supporting the Eagle Rest as we build it out and finish it up. So tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about mountain history. Now, the mountain history is fairly extensive. You wouldn't think it would be, but it's fairly extensive. And so I'm not sure we can get all of it in tonight. But I'm kind of watching my watch, and when I've gone about 35 or 40 minutes or so, then I will break it, and we'll come back later in the summer here, or just before the start of the spring, and do the second part. And we'll go from there. So the first part we want to talk about is the very, very early history up here, and that's the Indian history. And that's kind of hard to talk about because there's not much written. The Indians are an oral society. They didn't have languages except for the Cherokees, and they didn't get theirs until late in the about 1817, 1818. And so we don't have a lot of record of information. Now, one of the things that we do have is, come on down, folks. One of the things we do have is a book that was written over in Gilmer County. It's called The Annals of the Upper Georgia, centered on Gilmer County. And it covers the time from 1836 to 1835 to 1965. A gentleman by the name of George Gordon Ward wrote that. Now, the good thing about that is George went out and interviewed a lot of the old-timers, and whose old-timers would talk about what they knew and about what their parents and their grandparents have shared with them when the pioneers moved into this area. And that book tells us a little bit about the environment that was here. So one of the things that we'd like to share about you. You look at our environment around here, and it's small trees and whatever. Well, I mean, they came and logged the mountain quite some time ago. But if we go back to the Indian time, go back 300 years, then the forest here was made up of trees that were on the order of 5 to 10 feet in diameter. And the first limb would be about 60 to 70 feet in the air. And they would form a canopy that was very, very hard to get any light down through. And so what you have is you could see for a great distance in here. And that's where the Indians just roamed out through here. And one of the pieces out of that book is they cut a tree, and I don't know what the diameter of that tree was, but when they cut that tree down, it produced 4,875 board feet of lumber. Now, to put that in perspective, that's about 1/3 to 1/2 of the board feet for a regular sized house. So 2 trees or 2 or 3 trees would produce a house up here. And they came in and cut those things down out of here, cutting down a lot of the forest, all up and down the Appalachian Mountains here. So it was kind of tough. But here, with those trees and the canopy underneath here, what we had then are many, many plants that grew that didn't need all that sun, and they were the medicinal plants that the Indians liked. that they could use, such as ginseng and lady slipper and golden seal and stargrass and rosenroot and yellowroot and a lot of those other plants that they would come up in here. Also, in here were chestnut trees. And the chestnuts produced a nut that is a sweeter nut than, particularly the Indians, when they talk about gathering chestnuts, they make chestnut bread. And it's a sweeter bread than the acorns would make. And so they love that. But of course, we lost all the chestnuts out of here. But a lot of people came up and cut chestnuts and built their original cabins because the chestnut tree would not rot. And you can find today cabins that are still there from the pioneer days that still have the chestnut logs in them. So we had that here, and so the Indians were here. Now, if you go back beyond the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s, the first Indians that were here were the Creek Indians. Now, the Creek Indians, and we got to go back even further, there's other Indians back in here. The Creek Indians came from the west, across the Mississippi. They were a warring tribe, and they would find other Indians that were here already. The Yamasee, the Uchi, a number of other tribes were here. Now, the way the Creeks worked, they would get there and they said, okay, we're here, we're stronger than you. If you want to stay, you become part of us, part of our confederacy, and then you can stay and be with us. And if you don't, then you move on and get out of here. And some of them did, but many of them stayed. And so the Creek Indians were up in here. Now, they didn't like to live up here because there's no rivers. They wanted to live by rivers, so they were down by the, and we don't have a lot of data, by the way, on the Creek Indians, except way after into the 1700s, where they're out on the Flint and the Chattahoochee and the Oconee and other rivers, and some of them were living down on the Coosawattee and the Cartacay and the Flint and the Long Swamp. There was a Creek Indian village at the corner of Long Swamp and where it comes into the Etowah, many of them sitting on the Etowah River. They were all out in here. But what this part of the mountain was for them was a place to come harvest. This is where they came to do hunting. This is where they came to fish, to gather nuts, to gather medicinal plants, and what have you. And so the Creek Indians were all over this place. And that is until about 1725, 1750, and whoever you want to argue about that, it's kind of hard to figure out when. But the Cherokee, who were a northern tribe, the Cherokee were way up in the northeast part of the United States. They were up there thinking this is great until the Delaware made a pact with the Iroquois and said, we want to get rid of the Cherokee. And this is about the 1400s, and so they drove the Cherokee south. And they came into the North Carolina and South Carolina mountains and set up camp up there, and that's where most of the Cherokees were. But that was not satisfying to them, so let's come on south. Oh, there's those Creek Indians down there, we don't like them. And they started a battle, a constant battle. And the Indians in those days were people who lived by the adage of an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You come kill one of mine, I'm going to come kill one of yours. And that went on, back and forth, constantly fighting each other. You burn down my camp, I'll burn down your camp. And so all this went on for quite some time, and it really wasn't until 1817 when they had to sign a treaty. And the U.S. government said, all right, we're tired of this. They put a treaty and they built a line. And the line went from over by Athens right through the border of DeKalb and Gwinnett County, crossed the Chattahoochee at the golf course, I think it's called the Cherokee Golf Course, crossed over there, went out Shallowford Road, and went west, all the way to Gadsden, Alabama, and then north out of there. Creeks, you stay to the south of the line. Cherokee, you stay to the north of the line. and nobody fights anymore. And it pretty much stopped a lot of that mess. But they were all in here, and we know from a village standpoint that they were all down along the Etowah in our neighborhood here, some on the Long Swamp, but they had summer camps. Just 5 miles to the north of here, where Tate Mountain Estates is located, and Clear Creek right there, that was a camp. That was an Indian camp. In the early days, every time they drained that lake, they would find hundreds and hundreds of artifacts along that lake. So we know they were there. We know they were down just over the mountain this way and some others. And so they were around here, and they camped up in here. And we know also part of that because we have found some of the trails that they were walking on. We've also found some of the evidence, which are the marker trees that they used to mark various places of importance. Around here, they had all kind of interconnecting trails and doing it. And it really wasn't until 1805 that the Cherokees made the mistake of agreeing to open up this area to the settlers, and they put in the old federal road. And that came right through Pickens County, right below us here. If you've never seen the road, if you go down to Pickens High School, go in on Dragon Drive, go to the railroad track, look both to the one side, left and right, and there it is, right there. That's the old road from 1805. And so they opened up the world. People started coming here. Now, this was sovereign territory to the Indians. You weren't supposed to be here unless you had a passport. Of course, nobody was following the rules, and they would come through, and if they saw something they liked, they would park themselves and say, maybe I'm going to be here. And unfortunately, the government agents who were supporting the Indians weren't really taking any time to take care of these people and get them back out. And so all kind of stuff went on through there. This area stayed pretty much Indian. This was Cherokee County at one time. All the Indians were up in here and up until the 1830s when things started changing. But just before that, one of the biggest problems that occurred up in here, not so much on top of this mountain, but near here, was the gold rush. And it was called the 29ers. They found gold up around Lumpkin and out in a variety of places out toward Dawsonville. And huge amount of people came rushing over here. And it became, if you ever listen to the stories about the gold mining sites, it became a lawless place. People from all over coming in here, running into the territory at night to go mine gold, run back out so I can't be caught, and then I come back in the next day. And they did that. They built a town over here just a little north of here called Aurora. And it was one of the most lawless places around. And if you read the books and the history of that, it's just a phenomenal thing. But this was a great place. It was where they were, and they did all this thing. They had a number of ceremonial places up in here. I don't think this mountaintop right here was a ceremonial place, but Sharp Top was. Amicalola Falls was. And there's probably a few others that are around. Y'all just go on down through there.
We're sorry.
That's it. Go on down through there and find a place to sit. We're good. But they were here, and we know that they had a great presence of doing things there. The other thing that was here were ball grounds. There were 3 ball grounds in this area. One of those ball grounds is right adjacent to the Holy Family Episcopal Church, just right down below here. There was another one over by the Dairy Queen, and a third one out by Pocket Rock. And the one that we know and is preserved the most is down by the Church of the Holy Family down here, and you can go there and see it. It's a huge ball field. But they had, these warring tribes, and they didn't want to go to war. So the way they would settle differences, if you will, would have a ball game. The ball game was called stickball, and it's like lacrosse, except they play for keeps. And it was a rough sport. Diane and I interviewed one of the Cherokee Indians, an elder up in Cherokee, North Carolina, who played as his younger days. Just listening to him talk about how it was. I mean, if you got hurt, they didn't stop the game and drag you off the field. You just stayed there. You tried to get yourself off, and maybe if you did, they would replace you. But if not, you're just there on the field. And you played until you scored 12 points. And that may take days, or it may happen overnight. But it was a wonderful game that they played, and it was a rough game. But a lot of times, one village would challenge the other village for, money or for various things, or you get out, we're going to be here, and that's how the game went. And it was a wonderful thing. All this took place and kept going nice and fine until the removal period. The removal period started in 1830. Andrew Jackson, who was supposedly a friend of the Indians, was not necessarily a friend of the Indians, and he pushed the Congress to vote the removal, to get the Indians west of the Mississippi, and then actually got them beyond that and pushed them out. And some of them left. When they treated out lands, they just kept moving, particularly the Creek Indians. First treaty was 1790, then 1805, then 1817, 1821, 1827. Every time they just kept taking territory away from them, and they kept moving out, finally over to Alabama. The Cherokees decided, or some of them left, actually in 1790, but many of them stayed, and they stayed right here in this whole area of North Georgia. And in this area, they came with the removal and said, you're going to leave, and the state said, we want them out. They didn't leave. So in 1832, this is a land lottery state, and so they did the survey of the Cherokee territory, even though it's still theirs, but they told them that they could no longer operate as a nation, and they made them move their capital up to Red Clay, Tennessee. So they got out of the state of Georgia. And many of them stayed here. And they divided this area up into 4 districts. And each district was then divided into, each section was 4 sections, and many districts within each section. And then they divided it into land lots. A land lot is 160 acres around here, and 40 acres over by Dawsonville, and up by Lumpkin, which are called gold lots, because there was supposedly gold there. And so we had people, this is Section 2, District 5, and I don't know what land lots you got here, but these are land lots. And so the people could find their way and do that. Now, when they had the lottery, if you were served in the Revolutionary War, you were a widower from that, or you had orphan children, or a variety of other things, you could put your name in and get a free land lot. And people did. But there was nobody here. There were no roads. There were no anything. And so many of the people who got a land lot didn't move here. They just stayed and then sold their lot for whatever amount. Others moved here. When we started checking the records, we have indications that some just moved onto the lot and stayed there, and then eventually the owner never showed up, and so they declared themselves the owner of the land lot. Now, some of the early pioneers around here, and there are many, if we we kind of divide it up a little bit. I don't know a lot about the ones over in the Dawson side here, but 5 miles behind us here is Burnt Mountain. And on Burnt Mountain, a number of early pioneer families came here. John Dilbeck, the Isaac Burleson and his wife Hannah. And those two, Isaac and Hannah's story is one of the most wonderful stories to read about the early pioneers here. And I can't really go through the whole story here tonight, but if you want to read it, Diane and I wrote that some years ago, and it's up on the Mountain Stewards website. If you go to www.mountainstewards.org and go up to Mountain Scenes, and then under Mountain Scenes or Mountain Stories, and then you can find all the stories of the mountain and read about them. And some of those are being put up on the Eagle Rest website. But they were there, started in 1840, and Hannah and Isaac came from about Asheville, North Carolina, and in a wagon pulled by an ox with all their worldly possessions, and arrived here in 1840 and moved on to the property over there where Tate Mountain Estates is located today, and set up a town. That became a place named town in 1855, and it was there as a town until about 1910. So that was a town right up here on the mountain, and there were people all over the place. At one time, they had 65 children in the school there. We know that because they hired the teacher from down here in Dawson. We found the record of them hiring that teacher, doing that thing. Down to the west of us here, and what is referred as Bentry and down off the Cove Road area, were a lot of other families that arrived here. The Tates, the Griffiths, the Champions, the Wests, the Pagets, the Pendleys, the Pettits, the Darnells, the Fields, the Mullinecks, the Hendricks, and others. Hendricks Mountain, which is right over here, is named for the John Hendricks who came here. And at that time, when they moved on here, there was nothing up here. No roads, no people living up here, although they came up and bought some of that land and moved up on top of the thing. But they were in there with little cabins. They built a wood cabin out of logs and survived. And it was an interesting place to do. Now, at that time, this is Oglethorpe Mountain, but at that time, this was called Grassy Knob. And it didn't get changed to Oglethorpe until around 1932, 31, 32, and that was Sam Tate, who somehow convinced the authorities to change the name of the mountain, named it after the general who founded, moved in Georgia, and got it changed. It had a big monument here, and we did that. Now, they all moved in here. They all tried to survive, and the interesting thing about it is that's kind of about when the first land speculation started. And we want to talk a little bit about land speculation. John Hendricks and his two relatives, John and Joshua Darnell, they're down here farming just below us here. And they decide in 1849 that we have a gold rush out in California. They call the 49ers. And they turned to their families, to their wives and children, and said, "We're leaving. You keep the farm, you keep things going, you survive for however long, a couple of years, and we may come back." And off they went. And for them, fortunately, they did find gold. And they came back with a chunk of money. And I don't know how the wives were when they came showing back up, but I guess if you bring money back, you might be allowed back in. But they came in and they had money and didn't know what to do with it, so they went and bought 1,000 acres right here for 25 cents an acre. And for you folks who live in Bentry, you know what you paid for down there nowadays. They made some good money. And they kept that land pretty much, to themselves. They farmed all that area and did some things there. But that was probably the first land speculation going on in the thing. Now, about that same time, things started changing around here. Now, the first thing that changed was the marble industry moved down here in 1836, but really didn't get started going until about 1920. But then the railroads came in 1880, and then we had the cotton mills come in, and they were over in Talking Rock, and that was in about the 1840s or so. So what happened is we started getting jobs down off the mountain, and so people started moving off of the mountain and down into the valley, down around Jasper, because it's tough living up here. Anybody been up here in the wintertime, this is tough living up here. I mean, if you see the ice and the snow and you survive in those kind of conditions, it's really pretty tough. So people started going in there. And not much changed. You know, the population of Pickens County in 1880 was 7,286 people. Not a lot, but built up quite a bit. And things started, I think, pretty much calmed out into, you know, with the railroads and a few things going, but not a lot of changing going on. In 1911 is when things started to really change and the land speculators came in. Now, the first land speculator that came in here was Charles H. Whittington. Now, Charles was from Fulton County in Atlanta, grew up in Griffin, and he and his wife, Laura, had some money. Charles, interestingly enough, he was the secretary treasurer of the Aurora Colony Company in Fulton County. And they were, I don't know if you could call them shysters, but something close to that. They were selling land in Cuba. $1,500 for 5 acres. And the deal was you buy this land, and the get-go on it was you could get $3,000 worth of money from fruit sales on those 5 acres per year. So this was their big push, and they were conning people a lot. So this is the guy, Charles Whittington, Secretary Treasurer of that group. He comes up here, thinks this is a wonderful place. He buys up 1,735 acres right down here from the Hendricks and the Darnells and the rest of them. And he bought it for $10 an acre. Now, before, and we know this because we've been through the court records and we've chased all that down and found out who sold what and what land lots. And Charles, before the ink was dry on that contract, he goes home and he advertises in the Atlanta, Georgian and News, newspaper for that time in 1911 down there. And let me just read a little bit of the advertisement. Any man, by paying 8 1/3 cents a day, can own a farm. Just 2.5 hours from Atlanta in the beautiful Sapphire County of North Georgia. 4,000 feet. Huh. Anybody know how high it is on this mountain?
3288.
3288. Bent tree down in that neighborhood is about 2,000, 1,700, something like that. That's his first one. Recognized as one of the healthiest spots in the world and famous for its apples and poultry. 10 acres for $120, so he's asking $2 more an acre from what he bought it at. $10 down, $750 each quarter, no interest, no contract to sign. So here he comes, and he came up here. and with the intent of selling all this land. I'm going to make a big bundle. Before we started selling, he's a downtowner guy, doesn't know a lot about farming. Came up here and started a hog farm. Went broke. So then he started his land speculation. And what he did is he would go to all his friends in Atlanta and say, why don't y'all come on up here? Ride the train. I'll pick you up. Come on up in here and we'll put you up. Now, in order to have a place for everybody to stay, he built the Dude Ranch. Now, the Dude Ranch is about where the Bent Tree admin building is, just near there. The Dude Ranch, now, we know roads, hardly a road, there's a dirt road. If you go into Bent Tree today on the paved road, and just as you make the big curve to go into the gate, look up to your left and you can see the old road. Just an old beat up dirt road. So there's no power, no sewer, no water, no anything. He comes up and builds the Dude Ranch, the biggest house probably built in Pickens County at that time. The living room was 40 feet by 40 feet. The fireplace would take an 8-foot log. There were 14 rooms and a large porch. And so he needed water to do this. And so what he did is just over the hill here is Buck Skull Springs. It's in what is now Bent Tree. He put a pipeline from Buck Skull Springs down the hill and brought water down, piped it into his Dude Ranch, and put in 6 showers and 2 bathrooms. And the water just, ran right down through there. He had gas lanterns, a Monarch stove, and that wasn't good enough, so he built a second house, which was called Twin Oaks, and had all this place. Now, the good thing about learning about all this is a old pioneer, not pioneer lady, but from a pioneering family, Lily Mae Penley, who lives down over the hill down here on Penley Circle. She sat down and talked to Diane and I, and her father worked for the Dude Ranch when he was 14, and he kept really good notes. So we know what was going on there a little bit, and he said they were having some pretty wild parties on the weekends. They would come up and just enjoy themselves and do all that, but they didn't buy any property. And they all just had, oh, this is a great time. We just keep coming up here and enjoying that. And so they're sitting here with all this land, $10 an acre, spent all their money, built the Dude Ranch, nothing happened. 1917 comes along, World War I. Charles gets drafted. And so now they're sitting here, he's going off to war, may get killed, wife Laura sitting there holding the bag. And so before he left, he transferred all the property to Laura. And off he goes. Well, they're sitting on this big debt, and she's not knowing what's going to happen, so she starts selling the property. And we tracked that again through the court records. She sold it back to the people they bought it from for $2 and $3 an acre. So now they paid 10, they're getting back 2 to 3. And unfortunately, the court records are a little difficult to play with, but back in those days, but it appeared that they sold it all back. Not so. 1920 census, Laura and Charles are still here. Still living in the Dude Ranch, but now they call it Glad Joe, named after their 2 daughters. And in the Pickens Progress is an article about them marrying off Gladys. So here they are, sitting here with all this problems and all this stuff. And, you know, what I can't figure out is how are you still here? If you sold the land, how are you still living on it and doing anything? So come 1921, 1922, they are really about broke. And the records in the Pickens courthouse show that they resold the land again, this time to Sam Tate. They sold it to Sam Tate, and they sold the Dude Ranch and the Twin Oaks and a number of other things there. And it was one of those things where it just kind of crazy. But that was the first land speculator. And they didn't do well. They moved back to Fulton County. Oh, and I forgot to mention too, again, a little bit shystery. When you go through the court records on the purchases and the land business of Charles, he bought land on one day, and he signs up saying, "I'm from Fulton County." The next day, he would buy land, and he's from Oklahoma. And it just back and forth. And all through the records of selling and buying and doing all this, I don't know what Charles was about, but Charles was kind of a guy that just could go anywhere and seemed to be doing a lot of things kind of funny. Let's see, I'll just do a little bit here and bring you up and take you to a point where we'll bring it to a close for this side. From the 1922, Sam Tate bought all that land. Sam now is the baron of the marble business, making a ton of money, had a lot of good, powerful friends, and he's got a vision. He's the next land speculator. And his vision is to buy up this mountain. And so from back in the early 1900s all the way until 1928 or so, Sam bought up 10,000 acres, including this mountain. He owned all of it, and the way he got it was mostly through auction sales. He would wait till somebody, when they had the Civil War, they had to pay for the Civil War, so all of a sudden we have taxes on everybody. They couldn't afford to pay their taxes. So as soon as they didn't pay their taxes, their land went up on a sheriff's sale. Sam Tate showed up, or one of his sons or whatever, and they bought the land. And they kept buying land up. And if the people weren't selling it, there's all kind of stories of him going and pressuring everybody to sell their land and give it to me. I want it all. And he actually had all of the land for Big Canoe, all of this mountain, parts of Bent Tree, and all the way to the north to Burnt Mountain, the Burnt Mountain community, 10,000 acres. And he then began his vision of building the next big community, which was now called, at that time, was Tate Mountain Estates. And that's a whole big, long story, and I'm going to save that for the next time, where we'll really get into the details of what happened there in this next land speculation. And then we're going to talk about the CCC time in the 1930s, up to about 1940. We'll talk about how this became the start of the Appalachian Trail. The start of it is right where that tower is back there, in 1933, 32, 33, and how Sam Tate got it put here. when it was to be built somewhere else. And so there's a whole lot of other stuff there that we'll talk about on the second go of it. But that's to give you enough to contemplate for a little bit. And as I said, all of this, Diane and I did the research on it and wrote the stories. All of that was published in the Smoke Signals newspaper. We're the one outsider that publishes in that newspaper. I don't know why they accept us, but they do. Anyway, we've been writing all of that, and there's a whole lot more up there about some of the other aspects from around the community within about 5 to 10 miles. So you can read a lot of it. You can download any of it. It's all in a PDF format, and you can do whatever you'd like to do with it. But there's a lot of information up there. Okay, that's enough. If there's a question I could answer, if you have one, I'll be glad to try to do it.
Yes, when's your next, going to be your next talk?
When?
Yes.
We don't know.
Oh, you're going to leave us in suspense.
That's up to Ken. You know, like I say, we hope to get this facility built over here, and if so, we'll do it. But if not, we'll be back here. And, you know, we'll talk about that, but maybe within a month or so. We'll do it. And there's other lectures that we want to do up here, what have you. There's some really good people around that know the flora and the fauna, and they can talk about that. There's all kind of interesting things here on this property, and we just want to make you available, understand what's here and what you can benefit from knowing. And by the by, those who don't know, I mean, we've built, Ken opened this up. Ken and Billy Ann opened this up to the public. The Mountain Stewards, my organization, came in, and we brought our trail crew in here, and we built 2 hiking trails. One goes around the mountain just below us here, going around. It's fairly flat. It's a half a mile long, and you can come up here and park down below and get on that trail and walk around. Nice, easy walk. You want to do a mile, you can do it twice. The second trail starts in the same place, comes down around the mountain, and just below us here, just to the back, there's a little sign down there. That's the second trail, which is 1.7 miles long. It drops down 500 feet of elevation, down all the way to the CCC road, just down below us here, goes past the double springs that we found down in there. We've put a picnic table down there. So if you hike down there, you can stop, rest, enjoy the scenery, take your picnic lunch with you, then come back out about a 1/10 of a mile, and you'll be on the CCC road, and you'll come right back around to about the point where the old radio tower used to be. Those of you who remember the old radio tower back here, or back by the water tank on Bedtree. And then it comes back up the hill, and that's another 500 feet of elevation climb, and you come back to where your car was. That's a wonderful hike. Come up here and do it. Lots of flora, a lot of flowers blooming, wildflowers all the time. Someday we're going to try to get more interpretive signs out, so you'll know what each things are, the trees and the flowers if we can. And it'll be a great place. And also, in the long run, if we can find enough money, we will also build some very informative, interpretive signs to tell you the history of where you are. So you'll be able to learn it as you take these hikes. So that's here. Any day you want to come. We'll recommend doing it at night, but the trails are marked pretty well. They have either rock or fallen trees marking them, and we've taken out most of the vegetation. We have to keep working on that. But it's very easy to find. There are blazes. This trail up on the top is white blazes. The trail going down is yellow blazes. You can't get lost. And well, I don't think anybody can get lost. If you follow the signs and follow the trail and follow the blazes, and I mean, you should be able to do that pretty well. And I just recommend you do it. Those are there for the taking. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What are you standing under, Don? Is that a
Standing
Jasper
probably a hickory.
hickory?
It's 5 leaves, but it's a big history. We have, up here we have the shagbark hickory and the regular hickory, and it, can't tell for sure there, but we have white oak, hickory, all kind of other trees that are up in here. So, like I say, we'll get the interpretive signs put up one day, and it'll be a great thing where you can look at the leaf and learn about it and learn about what's here. Any other questions? All right, thank you for coming.
Thank you.